Welcome to the 11 Days of Global Unity Summit. My name is Jana Larson, and I am the coordinator of the Economic Justice Campaign for We the World, as well as many other things for We the World. Today, I'm excited that we will be joined by Dr. Riane Eisler, and we will be talking about the theme of children and youth. For the full 11 days summit schedule, to see the recordings and to register for free, go to 11daysofglobalunity.org or go to we.net. Rick Ulfik is the founder of We the World at we.net and the co-creator of 11 Days for Global Unity. Rick can't be here today for health reasons, however, he sends his love and best wishes. 11 Days of Global Unity goes from the anniversary of the tragedy of September 11th to September 21st, the celebration of the International Day of Peace, commemorating our collective journey from fear to hope. To take action with 11 campaigns for change, Trends Magazine with editor Robert Levine, and all the work of We the World, go to we.net. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Eisler. Dr. Eisler is a historian, futurist, and attorney whose research, writing, and speaking has transformed the lives of people worldwide. Her newest work, Nurturing Our Humanity, How Domination and Partnership Shape Our Brains, Lives, and Future, co-authored with anthropologist Douglas Fry, shows how to construct a more equitable, sustainable, and less violent world based on partnership rather than domination. As president of the Center for Partnership Systems, which is dedicated to research and education, her work has inspired the development of new metrics, demonstrating the economic value of caring for people starting in early childhood and of caring for nature, which are now being updated into a social wealth index by a team of economists. Dr. Eisler's research provides a new perspective on our past, present, and possibilities for the future, including a new social and political agenda for building a more humane and environmentally sustainable world. In the book, Great Peacemakers, she is listed as one of 20 leaders for world peace, along with Mahatma Gandhi, Mother Teresa, and Martin Luther King. Welcome, Dr. Eisler. That is quite a bio. When you hear that being spoken or see what all the work that you do you even go, oh my?
No, I guess I don't.
Well, you should.
With this word.
It's just what you do, right? It's just what you do.
It is just what I do. It's my calling, really. And
your passion.
My passion. And that passion is very deep, not only for me as a writer and as a teacher and as a speaker, but as a mother and a grandmother, deeply concerned about what kind of future our children and our youth really will have. And that depends on us now.
Are you scared?
Well, sometimes, of course, but I think that fear is something that is fanned by people trying to push us back. Mm-hmm. And ours is a time of great instability. And so some people are very frightened and want to, quote, return to some, quote, good old days, of what I call domination, where everybody knew their place in a system of top-down rankings. And we can't have that. It's just simply not just. It is also not sustainable. The conquest and domination of nature, which is part of what I call domination systems, is taking us to our species to an evolutionary dead end. So no, I am not scared, but I have a very, very strong commitment. And I invite everyone to join me into this work of building a better future.
When you were a child, what was life like for you?
Well, I had a very traumatic childhood, which
Mm.
is actually what my passion is rooted in. I was a child refugee with my parents from the Nazis. Um, the rise of the Nazis, of course, first in Germany and then in my native Austria. I was born in Vienna. Um, from one day to the next, my whole life, my whole world was turned asunder. It all changed from being this cute little kid that people patted on the head to my parents and me being hunted with license to kill just because we were Jews. And it was really only by a hair's breadth that we escaped. Um, but these traumatic experiences, and yes, also growing up, because we were able to get out, obviously, um,
Mhm.
growing up in the industrial slums of Havana with all where I really experienced poverty and observed it all around me. And these tremendous gaps in that time of Batista, etc., between those on top and those on bottom, led me to questions that my work and questions that many children and many grown-ups really, and certainly a lot of young people, youth, are asking, does it have to be this way? When we humans have this enormous capacity for consciousness, for caring, for creativity, why has there been so much insensitivity, cruelty, destructiveness? Is it inevitable or is there an alternative? And if so, what is it? And my research years later, multidisciplinary, cross-cultural, transhistorical research, the answer is a resounding yes, that there is an alternative, but we can't see it through the conventional lenses that we have been taught to use to see, quote, reality. And that really led to my work and the book that I'm best known for, which is something of a classic by now, is The Chalice and the
And the
Blade.
blade, yes.
Yes, Our History, Our Future, which is the first book for a general readership, really introducing what I call the partnership domination social scale. And that is really a long answer to your question about my childhood.
Well, that's what I was getting at. And at some point, um, fleeing to safety, living in poverty, at some point, somehow you were able to move on, get an education, and develop your research. Uh, how did that happen? I mean, with such trauma, most would, you know, and yet you didn't.
Well, I did for a while, actually. And that is really how we cope with trauma. And what I call domination systems are really trauma factories, starting quite early in families, certainly through war, through having to flee. I mean, all of these things through economics. I mean, this is, a subsection of social and economic justice. And I wrote a book about that, by the way, called The Real Wealth of Nations. And the subtitle, at the time that it first came out, all my books really are way ahead of their time. But when this book first came out, the subtitle, which is Creating a Caring Economics, I mean, just putting caring and economics in the same sentence was a big deal. Today,
Exactly.
we are talking about caring, at least that. But notice that the part from Biden's bill that was cut out was caring for people, caring for children, caring for youth, childcare, paid parental leave. We have to really change go beyond both capitalism and socialism. I mean, yes, we need markets. We don't happen to have a free one, and we certainly need enlightened government policies. But what we need is to move to an economic system, well, what I call a caring economics of partnerism, where the goal is what it should be, caring for people starting at birth and caring for our natural life support systems. And I invite everyone to really read that book, because it is a blueprint, really. Well, Archbishop Desmond Tutu called it a blueprint for the better world we have been so urgently seeking.
Yes. So I hadn't told you this question when we were talking before, but as a woman and as a mother who was a stay-at-home mom, I had been working in the system so that I could be putting money into Social Security. And then for years, I've been home caring for my children. And then I go back into the system when my youngest is in first grade. Now that I'm collecting Social Security, I have very few years in the system, and yet I raised two children to be contributing members of society. And that is, I mean, no dollar amount is associated with that, those years that I spent 24/7 caring for my children. And then again, with this pandemic, women are hard, as a segment of the population, are hard hit because they can't afford to pay for childcare. They can't go to work. They're there to take care of the children. And it just perpetuates a system where women's being a mother, being a caretaker and nurturer, whether it's the house husband or the, housewife, taking care of the children, and it's still messed up.
Well, and you are putting your finger on precisely the problem with both socialism and capitalism.
Mhm.
I mean, for one thing, if we really think about it, which for some reason people don't, both socialist and capitalist theory came out of the 1700s and 1800s, very early industrial times, and we're now in the 21st century post-industrial age. So they're antiquated economic operating systems. But the underlying problem is that both perpetuated what I call the hidden system of gendered valuations. And this is precisely what you're talking about. First of all, for both Smith and Marx, there is nothing in their series about caring for our natural life support systems. For both, nature is there just to be exploited. And as for the work of caring for people, children in families, caring for children, caring for the aged, caring for the ill, caring for everybody, keeping a clean and healthy home environment, which of course translates into keeping a clean and healthy planetary environment. Exactly. That work, according to both of them, was to be done for free by a woman in a male-controlled household. So much so, because I also, as you said, am an attorney, so I know my laws and my legal history. Even as late as when Marx wrote in the 19th century, in the 1800s, a wife, and most women were wives, could not sue for injuries that were negligently inflicted on her. Only her husband could for loss of her services. Now, fast forward to GDP, and that does not include. We live in a monetized world, and it's very well to say, well, that work should be done out of love and for free. I mean, that's great for people who don't do it, but the fact of the matter is that the mass of the world's poor and the poorest of the poor are women and children. And what you just said, in the United States, according to statistics, government statistics, women over the age of 65 are twice as likely to live in poverty as men of the same age. And it's not only because of, discrimination in jobs, it's precisely because most of these women are or were either full-time or part-time caregivers, and we don't get social. Now, this can be fixed. You understand? I mean, this is a choice. And we at the Center for Partnership Systems are working on a very important intervention, new metrics, because we measure what we value and we value what we measure. And these social wealth indicators, we launched the first iteration back in 2014. They show the economic value of the work of caring for people, starting at birth and caring for our natural life support systems. This value is huge in our post-industrial era, when even economists who live in some alternate reality
ivory tower somewhere.
Somewhere really, even they tell us that this is an era when the most important capital is what they like to call high quality human capital. Well, we know from nothing less than neuroscience whether or not people grow up to be caring, to be creative, to not just be able to follow rules and to give or take orders, whether they're resilient, largely hinges on the quality of care and education they receive, especially in their first 5 years. And yet policymakers, I mean, are they that ignorant? It's really hard to tell, but what we need is a public information campaign to show the value. And yes, we need what we call, there are 52 social wealth economic indicators, which is obviously too many. So we have a team of economists now, and we really invite you to find out about this at centerforpartnership.org. And yes, to support this work, to condense, they're working to condense and update these indicators into an index, just 1 or 2 numbers, okay? But they will show, well, look, one of the things we found, for example, is that among so-called developed nations, the United States invests the least of any such nation in family support. And not coincidentally, because you really have to connect the dots, we have the highest infant mortality rate, the highest child poverty rate, the highest maternal mortality rate. I mean, these are not accidents. These are the result of a completely flawed economic system, which does not value what is really the most essential human work, caring for people, starting at birth and caring for our natural life support system.
I have quite a few viewpoints on that I probably shouldn't get in today, but with the political agenda such as it is, and certain laws that are being put in place by certain parties and such, it's amazing. Well, I for one am going to definitely pay attention to your center and get involved as I can, because I'm a perfect guinea pig to study for this whole thing. Add to that divorce and not being able to afford a lawyer while he could, and I get nothing. But you know what? I get freedom as another thing that can't be measured and allows me to go forward. Well, this is very fascinating. And yes, children today. So I shared with you one of my questions about when I was a child of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and what I remember. Well, I should add, I remember President Kennedy being shot, and I was too young to understand. I remember I couldn't watch cartoons, and I remember my dad was an aerospace scientist, so of course he got us all up to watch Neil Armstrong watch on the moon. And Watergate, I was in high school, so I kind of understood that. And I remember we finally got a color TV, so it looked more interesting somehow than on black and white. And Nixon's resignation, Vietnam War, guys who were a little older than I were being drafted and going. So that's what I saw. But I had the advantage of growing up in an affluent area and in Boulder, Colorado, and not being too horribly affected by anything. I didn't get everything I wanted, but I had everything I needed, in addition to a college education that I didn't have to worry about. And now with everything the way it is, with all the unrest and uncertainty and what's going on in the Ukraine, and as it's climate warming, and thinking about what's happening with that nuclear power plant over there and what that's going to mean, if kids are the least bit aware today, is their perspective, do you think is just kind of like, well, that's what I've grown up with, so yeah, they just take it in stride? Or what is the neuroscience showing about how they're coping or not coping, how they're, just all those questions that I can't list all the, the jargon, but I can empathize, with how it must be.
Well, I think that the statistics, of course, you and I are familiar with them in the United States. The tremendous anxiety, the tremendous increase in at least in reported mental illness
Right.
is huge. Now, I think that part of that has to do, I remember, during the Cold War years, we were very afraid of nuclear war, and people were building shelters, and there were drills, and children had to
Yeah,
go
we had to
tests.
hide under our desks and put our, like that was going to help.
I know.
Even at the time, I thought.
I know. But I think that social media had the internet, we had such high hopes for the internet, and then it got hijacked. Really, the business model for the internet is a disaster. It's an environmental disaster because, of course, the whole business model is one of promoting overconsumption. And overconsumption, first of all, it doesn't satisfy. Once people's basic needs are met, food for over our heads, etc., which then the studies are very clear. Wealth does not necessarily, by any means, mean that people are satisfied. On the contrary, they're quite insecure. So, but social media has. Are you back? Am I back?
I hear you. There you are. I see you now.
We just lost, the miracles of the internet.
Exactly. Here we are. Someday we're going to look back on this and go, remember when we thought it was the bee's knees?
Well, we had great hopes for it. And
Yes.
It's true. Organizations like our Center for Partnership Systems can have an internet presence, whereas we couldn't before, really get out. I can teach online. And by the way, I am teaching a course starting very, very soon.
Yes, we should talk about that.
I'd love to talk about that because it is an online course based on my newest book, Nurturing Our Humanity, which is a fascinating, I learned so much. It takes me about 10 years.
You're still learning that. That's amazing.
But I always learn. I learned from talking to people like you. I learned from talking to audiences of my teaching. No, I learn all the time.
Well, some teachers think they know it all and they don't learn anymore. And
Well,
I'm sure you know who those people are.
yes, well, there are people who are sure that they have a direct line to the ultimate truth.
Oh, of course.
And
Yes.
it doesn't happen that way.
No.
Um, but I think that one of the disasters for young people has been social media, and
Mhm.
that has exacerbated um, so many of these problems, so many of these anxieties, so many of these mental disorders, the habit of comparing yourself. Uh,
Especially with
others.
girls to other girls. I mean, I remember when it was the 17 magazine, like that. How can she be so skinny? And I didn't know about, you know, that was terrible. I remember that. So I stopped looking at those magazines.
Well, there's such a thing as the editing and the airbrushing
And
and
yeah, well, yeah,
and there's also such a thing as anorexia and bulimia.
right. Yes,
And,
yes, yes.
but look, we have to really change our. If you ask people, most young people as well as most old people, there is a human yearning for caring connection.
Hmm.
And domination, what I call domination systems, get in the way of that at every turn. In families, caring and coercion, there's a confluence of those. And it's a mess because, I mean, our whole society uh, is now really yearning, well, not the whole society, but a very, very sizable minority in our society wants strong man leadership. And that's directly related to what's familiar from your childhood. And
Yeah.
the fact that, this is all in nurturing our humanity, the fact of this in-group versus out-group thinking and blaming, that's built into domination systems, whether it's Shia versus Sunni or Sunni versus Shia in the Middle East, or it's white versus black, or versus anybody with a different sexual orientation, or
Hmm.
immigrants. It doesn't matter. You deflect your fear and your anxiety, which are built into the system, to the out group. The out group has nothing to do with what the problems are, but nevertheless, that's what the quote authority figure says, and people follow it. So we have a lot of work to do. But the thing that my work is not just deconstruction, it's reconstruction. And this
Yes.
is what I am focused on, is what are
Looking
the
forward.
foundations that we need to build so that we can really move to a more just, more caring, more sustainable way of living and making a living.
That's exactly the view of Poor People's Campaign. Dr. William Barber and Reverend Dr. also Liz Theo Harris. I don't know if you're familiar with that work, but it's a major, massive campaign, and it's sort of reviving. Well, it is. It's reviving Dr. Martin Luther King's words. His "I have a dream," and it's reconstructing. Well, he's calling it. They're calling it the third reconstruction, to making a world that's better for all, and um, from the bottom up, giving voice to the voiceless. And so that's a really massive campaign, and it is all about that reconstruction. Well, let's talk about your course, because
Okay.
I'm sure you'd love to talk about it. And as I said, we have it on our global unity calendar with We the World, but I see it starting next week, September 20th, and it's going to
Right?
be
It starts September.
going
Go
to
ahead.
November 15th.
Yes.
And it says every Tuesday starting September 20th to November 15th from 7 to 8:30 Eastern. It's also offered in Central, Mountain, and Pacific time. And you have reading for the course will be your book you mentioned, Nurturing Our Humanity. And you're going to be working with Tim Selden, which he's the president of the Montessori Foundation.
That is correct. It's really a benefit for the Center for Partnership Systems, but it's being hosted by the Montessori Foundation. And Tim, who's an old friend, former board member of our organization, will be the moderator. And not only are the readings from Nurturing Our Humanity, but lots of videos, very short videos, lots of wonderful resources, because really it is not, it's an interactive course. And I want people to, the goal of the course is, yes, to provide information that we all need. We all really need to have this information, but mainly to empower people, not only in their personal lives. And I invite young people in particular to join it. Because, you know, one thing about young people, they know that the old systems are failing us. They're not resilient. Of course they're not. You know, I just spoke about the economic system. It came out of, you know, 300 years ago. I mean, come on. You know, these are old operating systems, and the realities today are quite different, but they are also flawed, deeply flawed systems for the reasons that we discuss. But there can be shifts. We can change things, and it starts with changing our own consciousness, with educating ourselves.
Keeping the good, getting rid of the rest, and building on the good with new ideas.
Absolutely, Anna. And that is really what this work is about, the work of shifting, leaving behind the domination elements, whether it's domination economics, because it isn't socialism versus capitalism. I mean, both turned into top-down systems, for goodness sakes.
Trickle down never worked.
Trickle down, well, trickle down is really domination economics, whether it was a Chinese emperor, or whether it was an Indian pasha, or whether it was feudalism, you know, where those on bottom were supposed to content themselves literally with the scraps falling from the opulent tables of those on top.
I've gotten a recent fascination with watching movies that take you know, happen in the medieval times. And I just, you know, with the serfs, you know, they're struggling, they're toothless, they don't have wood for their fire, they're eating scraps, their children are all forlorn and ragged. And then the king, you know, with his, you know, and I just think, gee, it's kind of starting to look like that.
Well, we're in the midst of a massive regression to the domination side of the social partnership domination social scale. But there's also strong movement towards partnership.
There is hope out there. And
Yes.
And it's a matter of building on the hope. Is anyone doing it right?
Well, look, I mean, when you say doing it right,
I mean, country-wise, like Denmark, for example.
Denmark, Finland, Norway, they have moved more to the partnership side. And not coincidentally, they see there are elements. I mean, I've identified 4 cornerstones. I mean, if you look at modern history, and bear with me for a moment here, you can see that in the last 300 years, during the period of instability of when the Industrial Revolution went into high gear, okay, every progressive social movement has actually challenged the same thing, a tradition of domination, whether it was the Enlightenment, so-called rights of man movement, challenging the so-called divinely ordained right of kings to rule their, quote, subjects, whether it's the abolitionists, and then the civil rights, and now the Black Lives Matter movement challenging, again, a tradition of domination, the so-called divinely ordained right of a quote superior race to rule over inferior ones, whether it's the feminist movement and then the women's rights movement, etc., which is global now, challenging again the divinely ordained right of men to rule over the women and children in the quote castles, a military metaphor of their homes, all the way to the environmental movement, challenging our once idealized conquest and domination of nature. However, these movements have focused primarily on dismantling the top of the domination pyramid, politics and economics as conventionally defined. And they have pretty much left in place the four cornerstones. And this is based on really multidisciplinary research on which we have seen the regression after regression to the domination side, whether it was Hitler in Germany, whether it's Putin in the former Soviet Union in Russia, whether it's the Taliban, whether it's ISIS, it doesn't matter. They always pay attention to the first two cornerstones, childhood and gender. Have you ever wondered why? Why in
all the time. All the time.
Well, I'll tell you why. Let me give you an example from Putin. In 2018, Putin radically decreased the penalty for family violence, so that today, if you hurt or kill a child or a woman in your family, the penalty is much lower than if you hurt or kill a stranger, which of course makes absolutely no sense, but it makes a lot of sense in terms of the connection between the highly punitive, rigidly male-dominated authoritarian family.
The devaluation of woman and child, dehumanization.
Right. And the having a highly punitive, rigidly male-dominated authoritarian state.
And white male.
Gets it. Putin gets it. The people in the United States pushing us back get it. Since they first came together around a quote women's issue, the defeat of the Equal Rights Amendment, a simple amendment that would simply have prohibited the federal government or any state.
Because they felt threatened
on the basis of sex. But remember, their so-called social issues focus on children, family, and gender. This is not coincidental. No. And we progressives have to pay attention, much more attention to gender and childhood. Then there's economics, and I've already spoken about that. We need to move to a new economics, and there's movement in that direction, but it is facing enormous backlash and regression. We need to move to a caring economics of partnerism. And then there is story and language. They're brilliant at language. I mean, they've taken over family, and we've let them. Taken over morality. We have to get these back.
Exactly. Dr. Marty Casey, do you know of Dr. Marty Casey?
No.
You'll have to find out about her. She's with the Ungun Institute, and there's much more to say about her. But I was on a podcast with her, and we were talking about, it was right when all these states were coming up with these anti-abortion laws and ruling, and she was saying, you know what, you have to follow the money. Follow the money. Who's at the top making all the decisions? It's the old white man. And she was saying, if you follow the money, we have to get white men involved in this issue. And I agree. I mean, yeah, it's all right for a bunch of women to descend down Washington, D.C. and to get more women out to vote, but we have to get the white older male involved, or just the white male.
Well, it isn't only the white male. I mean, there are also in the African American community, there's a very strong religious evangelist movement against abortion. Um, but even the
No, I mean,
oppressed,
just like follow the money as far as lawmaking.
well, even the oppressed have bought into the false system of values is the
Mhm.
problem. But I
Yes,
agree with you that we have to follow the money. But
economics,
it isn't only the money. It
right?
is the family structure. It is, I mean, in nurturing our humanity, I really talk about the findings. For example, people who voted for Trump, there are two very important studies that we need to understand. It wasn't that they felt economically deprived. A lot of these people didn't. But if you look at the four cornerstones, in terms of gender, they shared a horror of so-called uppity women. They were really
Mm,
stuck in the rigid gender stereotypes that Trump promoted, but also in terms of parenting, they were not interested in fostering curiosity, in fostering independent thinking. No, their primary concern was really conformity. Now, these are empirical studies of people. In other words, they were really captives of what I call the domination trance.
and the domination trends can perpetuate misinformation and alternative facts because it's a very willing audience to not display any signs of curiosity or questioning if they go along with those cornerstones. And then there's the whole concept of family. If you're a conformist, you're not going to like the idea of two women heading a family, two men heading a family, or a family where you don't have father knows best with the June Cleaver with her apron and, the older brother and the little sister and the dog and the cat. You're not going to go along with that ulterior a definition of what a family is. So
Well, we don't honor families. I mean, we don't value families. We really are trying, I mean, the culture, they have pushed the normative ideal for family back to that of a domination family. And
father knows
again,
best with his
God knows best. And we really have to pay attention to that. And I urge progressives, think of these four cornerstones. Think that it is not coincidental that whether it's for the Taliban, whether it was for Hitler, whether it's for Khomeini in Iran, whether it was for Stalin in the former Soviet Union, right, left, secular, religious, they paid a lot of attention to these four cornerstones, especially
so
childhood and
they
gender.
they had a thought, or was it just because they just felt divinely ordained to be able to be leaders because of the color of their skin or their gender at birth, or was it just so conniving that it was really recognized and planned? I mean, how does that come out?
Well, I think it comes out in many ways. I think that it is people who are held captive in the domination trance and who do see, look, St. Augustine, a long time ago, said that for anyone to question their status in life in these rigid top-down rankings, man over man, man over woman, race over race, religion over religion, sexual orientation over sexual orientation, et cetera, for anyone to question this, it's like a nose wanting to be an eye. And that is a domination system, right?
Except
there.
where you're at, except your lot in life, then, in other
Now
words.
we've moved. I mean, we've moved. I sometimes say it as a joke that when I get really depressed, I think of the European Middle Ages, you know, because they looked a lot like the Taliban with the Inquisition, the Crusades,
Yeah.
the witch burnings. Women and children had no rights. In fact, human rights was, I
It was
mean,
non-existent.
totally non-existent. So we have moved, but we have to, these regressions are getting more and more dangerous every day.
Mhm.
And the denial that is part of them is part of the dynamics of domination systems, starting, as I said, in domination families. And of course,
Yes.
domination economics create artificial scarcities. I mean, this is all in my books, really, and we'll be talking about it in the course in Nurturing Our Humanity. But think about it, not only is there total misdistribution of resources, you know, to those on top, but there's also misdistribution into weaponry and warfare. Now, as a child Holocaust survivor, I believe that in a world where there are more rigid domination regimes, you know, like Putin, like the Taliban, like Khomeini, etc., Iran, etc., we have to have some defense, quote. But
Yeah.
what we invest and the wastefulness of it
Mhm.
and weaponry is insane. But
Yeah.
not only that, we fail to invest in human capital, quote unquote. In other words, in human capacity development, including human creativity. And I have, you know, you asked me if I have, what do I believe? I have a great belief in human creativity once it's unleashed, because
Exactly.
everything around us, practically, not just the furniture and the internet, but our values, our social institutions, they're human creations, human inventions.
It's
So
almost like
we need to
school
change
teaches
that.
teaches it out of us. I remember that, you know, if you ask a child, and I remember because I used to be a preschool teacher, if you ask a child if he or she's an artist, yes, I'm an artist. Are you a dancer? Yes, I'm a dancer. Are you a singer? Yes, I'm a singer. You know, because they you know, if they're happy and they're growing up well, they are all those things, you know. And then later on, well, I'm not a singer. I'm not an artist. I'm not a dancer. I can't do that.
It's
I'm
beaten out of children, literally beaten out of so many children. And of course, I mean, one of the trends, for the first time, the American Psychological Association came out a few years ago, finally, uh, saying that, gee, spanking, hitting children is not only an ineffective way of discipline, but it is physically and emotionally and mentally harmful. But you know, I mean, some of the countries that have been moving more to the partnership side, I mean, about 50 of them now have laws on the books saying that it's against the law to use physical discipline in families. And yet, surveys show, and you know, this is in Nurturing Our Humanity, they show that the majority of people worldwide still believe, I mean, talk about denial. They believe that it's okay to spank children. And they may be against violence, but for some reason, I taught a course to graduate students. And there was this one woman who kept saying, well, spanking is not violence. And I said, really? I mean, you know, it's just denial. It's absolutely, but people are in this domination trance.
it just felt, I mean, I couldn't. I found positive reinforcement to be much uh more effective.
Well,
And
of course.
I was spending some time with my adult children last week, and we were talking about it. And I said, I saw somewhere that dogs prepare people to be parents, and being a cat owner prepares you to have teenagers. And And I was thinking, I remember reflecting on my kids and growing up, and because, well, they were on the spectrum, and so I had to get acquainted with the idea of behavior modification, and whether and it worked. It really did work, and so I was able to raise them both that way, and it was very effective. And so when they got to be teenagers, they weren't like teenagers. We got along great, and we still get along great. And so, hey, I'm a proponent for positive reinforcement, and doesn't that work for everybody, really?
Well, of course it does. And the trend is, I mean, pediatricians are writing about authoritative rather than authoritarian, and
Hmm.
also nonviolent
You can still
parenting.
establish boundaries without having to use violence, and you can still raise a very creative, freestyle, free thinking, free form children without having to stifle. I mean, they have to know their boundaries. We all have to know what our boundaries
Well,
are.
that's it. We in the 60s, we mistook rebellion for reconstruction. So, I mean, I am encouraged by these partnership trends, but even though we read more in the media about children, about young people, about women, about gender fluidity, et cetera, it's still a sidebar to the quote more important issues. And
Mhm.
this is what we have to change. This is why this research is so important. These four cornerstones are really a roadmap to building a more caring, a more sustainable, a more equitable and just future. It can be done. We can do it. But as Einstein said, we cannot solve problems with the same thinking
That's
that created
insanity.
them. So we have to change our paradigm. We have to change our worldview, leave behind right, left, religious, secular,
Mhm.
Eastern, Western, capitalist, socialist. For one thing, there have been terrible, repressive, violent regimes in every one of these categories. So none of us tell us what we have to build. But for another, think about it. They marginalize or ignore nothing less than the majority of humanity, women
Mhm.
and children. And we have to stop this. We need systems, approaches that are holistic. And I guess this is what this work is about, is to change first our consciousness, because consciousness leads to different behavior. Different actions lead to changes. Then the consciousness again can go up and up and up. And we really can make the changes that we need to make so that we not have a perfect society, but at least a society that is more just, more sustainable. And I should add, for those of you who are familiar with The Chalice and the Blade, with Sacred Pleasure, with some of my earlier books, and also this information is in Nurturing Our Humanity, we now know that we have been told false stories about human culture. We know that for millennia, for millions of years, in gathering hunting societies and foraging societies, we lived in more partnership-oriented societies, more equitable, more gender balanced, less violence. In fact, we know from archaeology that warfare is at most 5 to 10,000 years old. Now is up to us to change that story, because think of the caveman cartoon, in one hand, he's got a club, a weapon, other hand, he's dragging a woman by the hair. So what's the message? That injustice, violence, male dominance, that's just how it is. It always was, by implication, always will be. This is false. It's a false story. So I invite all of you to really learn about the information that we today have. And I look forward to seeing at least some of you in our online class on nurturing our humanity.
What she said, she knows what she's talking about. Now, how can they sign up? Can they sign up at your website?
They can find it on our website, but they can also go to the Montessori Foundation website and they can sign up under classes for nurturing our humanity. And thank you so much, Jana. It's been a pleasure to talk with you.
Well, Dr. Riane Eisler, I have to admit, I was a little nervous about meeting you today and speaking with you, but I think you're just absolutely delightful and super easy to talk with. And I want to know more, so I'm going to find out more. So thank you so much for being here. So here's the part where I hold up 3 fingers, and you can too, Dr. Riane, if you would like. It's looks like the Girl Scout promise. Hold up, but then you turn it down and you say, let's go from a me society to a we society, the we consciousness that
I
Rick
like that.
promotes with 11 days of global unity. So together we can create a world that works for all. And go to we.net to get involved. And please look up Dr. Riane Eisler's information for her books and upcoming classes. Thank you so much. Much love to you.
Thank you, my
You've been
dear.
fascinating to talk with. Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, and goodbye, everybody.